Welcome back to In God We Trust podcast. And today we are doing a study on apologetics, Apologetics 101. And it's basically just like a little YouTube video I saw. I just wrote down a bunch of notes of this guy, of what he said. And I'm basically just going to read to you those notes. And it's literally one question, but it's insane.
Oh, great. So let me get this straight. What we're going to be listening to today is basically this guy took notes on a YouTube video from one of the popular apologists out there, probably either William Lane Craig, J. Warner Wallace, or Frank Turk. Let's see which one he watched and then poorly took notes for. But essentially, what we're getting is like the telephone game from apologists now. I'm very interested to see what people take away from either one of these apologists that I've listed, and I have an idea of who he might have listened to, which I think would be rather apparent at the very end of this video. So, but if you want some Bible studying, then join us every Tuesday when we study the Bible. We're currently going through in chronological order the story of the Bible. So if you want to be more educated about what the Bible says, like really says, and if you want to get KC's as well as my take on the Bible, then tune in on Tuesdays at 11:30. But if you heathens want to fuck around and find out what this Apologetics 101 TED Talk is about, then please stay tuned. What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today, we're hearing from a apologist? Can we call him an apologist? I'm not exactly sure, because he seems to have just taken notes off of a apologist video and is just going to relay that information to us through his video. I would think that you would just want to share the original video if all you're going to do is parrot the original video, but you know, whatever. What we're talking about today is what evidence do we have that the God of the Bible, Yahweh, exists? And we're going to get an Apologetics 101 course from this guy.
And the answer is pretty in depth, so I hope that you guys try to pay attention to this and really follow along, because it goes in depth with a lot of things. So I hope that you guys can understand this and enjoy it. Here we go. Here is apologetics. And for anyone out there, apologetics, that is defending your faith and standing up for if someone asks a not a trick question, a tough or tricky question about God.
So in case anybody doesn't know what apologetics means, it's just defending the faith. Which honestly, I feel like if God is the most powerful thing in this world, why does he need apologetics to defend himself, like against the claim that he doesn't exist? I feel like the existence of apologetics is kind of not exactly an argument against God existing, but it definitely highlights how powerful God isn't, because he's obviously not all powerful. If he was all powerful and all knowing and all this other shit, I really don't think that apologetics would be necessary. Anyways, I digress. Let's grind up this evidence and snort it. Oh, God's existence.
So here is the question. What evidence outside the Bible do we have that God exists?
Whew. Okay, so this is going to be a little tough on his part, because as far as his God existing, the Bible is the only evidence for his particular version of God. But then separately, there's this ambiguous idea of God, like a deity that does exist. And so any evidence outside of the Bible would prove that one does exist, but that doesn't get us to Yahweh existing. So right off the bat, he's crippling himself a little bit by not using the Bible to prove God. But let's see how he gets there.
So the answer is the universe had to have a beginning, and that is space, time, and matter. And there's like no one out there that will disclaim that something has to start from a creator. There has to be space, time, and matter. But the only thing that is controversial is what caused it, and that is the Big Bang or God.
Well, I mean, this is kind of a false dichotomy here, because for one thing, he's talking specifically about his version of God, not an ambiguous deity that could have started the universe. He said at the beginning of this little section that nobody would disclaim that a creator has to exist. So this makes me think that he's specifically only ever arguing for his version of God, which would go along with what he said about proving God exists without using the Bible. But I definitely do dispute the idea that a creator had to create something. Now, the Big Bang is not a creator. The Big Bang was a natural event that definitely happened. We have pictures for it. There's no reason to say that the Big Bang is a creator in a similar way that God is claimed to be the creator. So these are two totally different things. One's nature, again, not as some kind of sentient entity, but just nature as it exists and operates without any kind of sentience, versus a sentient creator is what we're talking about here. So he's already kind of begging the question a little bit. And I feel like that's going to plague this entire argument here.
So here's the thing. Whoever created space, time, and matter can't be affected or made of space, time, or matter. So the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, and personal because he chose to be with us and to have a relationship with us.
So that last bit right there is kind of jumping the gun, don't you think? I don't think that you've actually established that this God is personal in any kind of way. You also haven't established like why this God would choose to make this universe, or that a decision was made at all. You see how I said that the begging the question issue is going to plague this entire argument? Because he's starting from a position thinking, oh, well, somebody had to create all this shit. And so that somebody has to be all of these things. And all of these things are the things that describe my God. Wow, my God, that means Yahweh's real. If you set up your question to answer the only way you want it to answer, then you're only ever going to get the answer that you want. Is that a real or genuine or honest investigation of this question of how this universe came into existence? If you only ever ask questions to get the answers that you want, I don't think that you're looking for an honest answer. I think you're looking for your answer.
So, when you think about these things, what do you think of? People will think of God.
Oh shit! I guess fucking, take this shit down, rise me up out of hell, and put me up there with God and Jesus in heaven and everything like that, because I'm gonna praise Jesus for the rest of eternity. Because this guy made a poorly formed argument.
So then people will say, how do we know it's a Christian God? And it could be Allah. Allah is the Muslim God. So we need to look at the evidence that we have, and this goes to Jesus and him raising from the dead. But that's going inside the Bible, so we can't do that yet. So that is how we know it's a Christian God if someone asks what God it is, because then we have to open up the Quran. Sorry, I just like saying it like the how they say it in their special language, Quran. You can say Quran if you want, but it's cooler that way.
Oh, well, shit, thank you so much for that, giving me permission to pronounce it however in the fuck I want to. But also, special language? 313 million people speak Arabic in the world. What the fuck are you talking about with, their special language? I feel like that's very condescending of you. But also, I love the fact that he's like, oh, how can we prove that this is the Christian God? As if he's not already arguing for the Christian God to begin with when he's describing this quote-unquote creator of the universe. But he's just like, well, in order to explain how it's the Christian God, we have to go to Jesus' resurrection, and we can't do that yet because it's in the Bible. So that's how you would prove that it's the Christian God. I guess by using Jesus? It's like, well, what makes all of this, the Christian version of God? Well, I'll tell you right now, Jesus. Always the answer. 1 + 1 = Jesus. What's the square root of 2? Jesus. What's the square root of Jesus? Because it's imaginary anyways. But just proclaiming Jesus as an explanation for this creator that he himself has just created in his argument is rather laughable. I feel like apologetics is starting to dwindle to the point of just being ridiculous to like where you could just laugh it off. And that's what I feel like I'm doing most of the time is I'm just laughing at all of these arguments. This is not a good argument for the Christian God being the one and true God.
But it's not really cool because it's a different God, but...
Yeah! Fuck them, right? They have a God that's different than your God, so, it's not cool at all. What?
So yeah, Muslims have the Quran and we have the Bible. So we can look towards Jesus and the evidence of that in him raising from the dead. And that is God himself, because no one else has ever done anything like that unless it would be God.
So, your evidence that the God of the Bible is the one that created everything is given by Jesus' resurrection. Well, we don't have any good evidence that suggests that Jesus resurrected, at least historically. So, I don't feel like he really has all that great of evidence that this is the Yahweh version of God. It kind of seems like he's just heard these apologists telling him all of this bad information, and now he's somewhat regurgitating it while putting his own little spin on it here. So no, there is no evidence that solidly places Jesus as resurrecting in history. The only evidence that we have is contained within the Bible, so I don't think that any of this would really prove anything. Please try again.
Okay, proof of intelligent design is that the universe aligns with itself. And I think any scientist would agree that if the sun was off a little bit, like too close or too far away, or skipped a beat or anything, that everything would go south. Because then it'd be in a different little rotation. I know there's a real word for that in our solar system or whatever.
Yeah, it's called an orbit. The Earth, you could also say the Earth revolves around the sun. No scientist would agree with you on this point, mainly because the Earth has a standard deviation in its orbital path of around 1 million to 1.5 million miles. The sun is 93 million miles away from us, and the Goldilocks zone is much bigger than the deviation in the Earth's orbit. It's not that it would just get a little bit closer or a little bit farther away, because that's not how orbits work. Generally, a planet's orbit is in elliptical shape, not perfectly circular, which I feel like is a big misconception that a lot of apologists have. Just keep that in mind. We definitely do get closer to the sun and move farther away from it in relatively small amounts considering the size of our universe. I don't feel like he has that understanding. Like, I feel like most apologists out there think of it as just moving slightly closer or slightly farther away. They don't really define what they mean by slight. And yes, if the Earth was in a different position around our sun, we would probably not be able to support life. But that would just make this planet similar to most of the other planets that exist in the universe. But that doesn't represent all of the planets in the universe. There is a very small percentage of planets that are habitable. And we've been able to deduce that it's on the order of billions of planets that exist out there. But in comparison to the amount of planets that most likely exist, that's a very small percentage. So as long as it's not 0%, that means that there are planets out there that can sustain life, and we just happen to be one of them. Does that make us special in a way? Yes, I guess so. We are lucky in that we reside on a planet that supports life, but if this planet didn't support life, then we wouldn't be here. We would be on another planet. So I don't see the point in this particular argument.
But and the same thing goes for the moon. Like, the moon messes with our sea tides, and if that was out of line, it would just be completely different.
So yes, for how the Earth exists now, the moon is in the position that it's in, and that gives us our tides and all this other stuff. But the moon hasn't always been in that position. It's been closer in the past, and it's currently moving farther away. So the moon is not going to stay in the exact same orbit in general. It's always changing its orbit. So to say that if the moon's orbit was different, then life wouldn't exist here, or life would be different, or something like that, just doesn't make a lot of sense, because the moon's orbit is never exactly the same. With the moon's orbit constantly shifting, his argument, again, makes no sense.
So, God is very intelligent. He aligned everything, and it's been perfectly formed ever since creation, and it's just all like clockwork. It just all works around each other.
this again doesn't make a lot of sense because we know that, like, for instance, our electromagnetic field that surrounds the Earth and protects us from the solar winds from the sun, that has changed multiple times over the years. So if God perfectly formed our planet at the beginning of time, which is not how any of that works, but regardless, if God did that, then why have there been polar reversals on the Earth? And we've been able to detect that multiple times. We're actually a little late for a polar reversal right now. But not only that, with the moon, you have the changing orbit. So if God created everything as it exists now, then why do we have evidence that the moon's orbit was different in the past? So that really doesn't seem to correlate with what this guy is saying. Also, another thing is that the Earth's spin hasn't always been this particular speed that we're traveling at right now. It was moving faster at one point in our past, but now it's settled into the speed that we're going right now, and that means that it could change in the future as well. Due to the moon orbiting around the Earth, there definitely is a trade-off in energy due to the moon's orbit. So I don't think that God created everything perfectly as it exists now, because the very face of our Earth has changed a lot over time.
So you mean to tell me that the Big Bang, that happened and everything is so perfectly aligned that if anything is messed up any differently, then that would be like the end of the world, basically? It would go south from there? There's no way. Because the Big Bang, it's just an explosion. And then the Earth came to be, and there's the stars and everything. So, and that created everything that is so intelligently designed.
Y'all know what I'm about to play, right? Everybody should know what I'm about to play. Snoop Dogg!
Smoke weed every day.
This concept is just so weird to me that apologists make it out to be like when the Big Bang happened, or this inflation of the universe, the entire universe formed as it exists now, immediately. They don't understand how our universe developed slowly over time. At the very beginning of, right after the inflation event and when normal inflation took over, the universe was too hot and dense for even atoms to form. It had to wait about 300,000 years for atoms to even start to come together. And then after that point, natural forces take over, and eventually, over billions and billions of years, like 13.5 billion years, we end up with our planet. That's a long fucking time, okay? So I think apologists need to really just stop pushing this whole idea that when the inflation happened, everything formed immediately, because it makes them look totally ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't know. You guys can think what you want, but I don't know. That's just my thoughts. The intelligent design thing it just seems so obvious to me, I guess, because we're all made pretty similar in the image of God. And if there was a Big Bang, here's what I think of. Wouldn't there be like all these like weird, like not similar creatures? Even though all animals are like different in every kind, they still have all similar traits, like one mouth, a digestive system, and like a bloodstream system, and they all have the same output. There's like three main things that are all similar. Humans have that: a mouth, your blood system, and your stomach, and an output.
So what he's asking here is, if evolution really happened and it was all natural and not guided by God, wouldn't there be different animals exhibiting different traits? Yes! And that's exactly what we have. I don't know what he means about how all animals have like a mouth, a digestive system, and a circulatory and blood system and everything like that, because there are definitely, like for instance, the platypus doesn't have a stomach. I didn't know that till today! Also, spiders are incredibly different than like humans or what you would normally think about as far as a circulatory system goes, because what they have is an open circulatory system. But even better than that, there are some animals that exist that don't even have circulatory systems. Flatworms, nematodes, jellyfish, coral sponges, hydra, and sea anemones. None of them have a circulatory system and none of them have blood. Also, more interestingly, not all animals in the animal kingdom have red blood. For instance, New Guinea has a green-blooded skink, crocodile, icefish, octopuses, horseshoe crabs, and brachiopods. None of them have red blood. They have different colors of blood. And as far as like mouths go and stuff, there have been animals that have existed here on Earth that don't need a mouth. The tracheoplax, didn't need a mouth, and it just sort of absorbed nutrients from its surrounding environment. That means that it has no mouth, no stomach, no muscles, no blood, and no circulatory system. So yes, we definitely have had animals that look nothing like us. We definitely have animals now that are completely different than us. I don't know what the fuck he's talking about.
So there's evidence of the same like little niche, I guess, of God creating things. If there was a big bang, wouldn't there be like all these weird, extravagant, weird little things running around? Just doesn't make sense to me. But I don't know, that's a thought. But people could say that is what's happening right now because like squirrels and possums and that stuff, but...
Wait, how are squirrels and possums like the weird things that are running around? Also, I mean, you talk as if those things are relatively new. Like as if, that's just happening now with these things. I don't know what you mean by this. This seems like a very awkward thing, especially when you can look up weird fucking animals on the internet all day. You can find weird fucking animals that resemble nothing like a God-created image or whatever in the fuck he was saying. It amazes me how it seems like he literally did no counter research to what was being said in whatever presentation he was watching. We still don't know which one it was. It could have easily been J. Warner Wallace, William Lane Craig, or Frank Turek. So I'm still baffled by the fact that he seems to have the inability to do like critical research on the things he's being told. This is the problem with people that listen to apologists.
Anyway, okay, so let's get back to it. Another argument is morals.
Oh, fuck me. This is frustrating. Very frustrating. I mean, the moral argument is one of the worst arguments you can use because morals are inherently subjective. Even on a Christian worldview, morals are subjective. If your religion hasn't stayed the same since its origin as far as its moral foundation goes, then there's no way that you can claim that your religion has the one true moral foundation as laid out by God. That just doesn't make sense whatsoever. The Christian moral foundation has changed several times throughout history, and you can tell. It's literally in the history textbooks, as long as you don't live like in Florida or some shit.
Like it's wrong to torture babies, or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in the Holocaust. Then there has to be a God. Why though?
That's a good fucking question right there, sir. Why does there have to be a God? Because there's a lot of things in his little thing. So first he mentions genocide. How can we say genocide is wrong? Well, God! I don't want to hear that shit about genocide because several places in the Old Testament, God directly commands the Israelites to go and commit genocide on the Midianites and several other people groups. But he has them go in there and kill them. Next, in that very same incident, God also violates the whole, it's a bad thing to kill babies, or it's immoral to kill babies, because God directly tells the Israelites to go in and kill Midianite children. Kill them, but just take all the prepubescent girls for the spoils, and totally not sex things that are going to be sex things ultimately. So in that one little sentence, you have one concrete example in the Bible of God not being the moral foundation you claim him to be. How am I supposed to take people like this seriously when right off the bat, in one instant, everything you claim about your God's moral foundation just crumbles? Get better arguments, please.
'Cause if there is no God, then it's just an opinion against another opinion.
Aha! But it's still just an opinion against somebody else's opinion, because God's opinion about the moral foundation is just some other fuck that wrote it down and said that it was God's opinion, but ultimately it's still one opinion against another opinion, and I feel like most people today have a better opinion about morals than God had about morals in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. The very fact that this guy says that murdering babies is wrong, genocide is wrong, makes him so much more moral of a person than his own God, and he doesn't realize it.
That would be just your opinion against a baby torturer's opinion, or your opinion against Hitler's opinion. But we all know that things aren't just a matter of opinion, because we all know that murder and torture and terrible things are wrong, just morally in our brain. Like in our mind, we know right from wrong.
Do we? So this totally negates the experiences of psychopaths and sociopaths, and just general people, because what occurs to me as being wrong could totally not occur to somebody else as being wrong. And we, as a species, essentially, has decided that, murdering babies is wrong and that committing a genocide is wrong. Now, there are still outliers, people that don't see a problem with genocide. I mean, just look at the insanely conservative religious right in America now. They don't see a problem with the genocide of a certain group of people. So it's really weird for me to hear this coming out of his mouth, because it just goes against everything that we know about human beings in general. Because all human beings have an opinion. They're like assholes, and everybody's got one, for the most part. I'm sure that there are some people that don't have assholes, but you get what I'm talking about. But still, it ultimately comes down to opinions. You're talking about one person's opinion about what God's opinion is. It's still all ultimately opinion. And yes, I think that my opinion is much better than your Bible's opinion. And I think that the apologist that you learn this from, he probably has a better opinion than God's opinion. It's still all opinionated bullshit, which inherently makes it subjective.
But the thing is, there has to be a higher standard beyond us, and a standard of goodness, justice, righteousness, and that standard, everybody knows it has to be God.
No, everybody doesn't know that, but also I would say that in Christianity, there is no sense of justice at all. Like, there's no real justice in Christianity. What I think of as justice is judging someone's actions at the effect of their actions on the people around them, people in society and everything like that, and punishing them appropriately or charging them appropriately or whatever, making sure that they pay for their crimes against the society that they live in. And that's directly judging them for the actions that they perform. But what Christianity does is not that. Christianity, at the end of it, when all is said and done, does not judge you. Well, okay, depending on the denomination that you're in, but he's obviously talking about a Protestant, like an evangelical Protestant kind of thing. So we're going to go with that for right now. But at the very end of everything, as far as the evangelical Protestant position goes, when you get to heaven, you are judged on one thing alone, and that's whether or not you believe in Jesus and accept him as your savior. That's it. You are not judged by your actions. You could have committed genocide. As long as you accept Jesus as your savior before you die, you get into heaven, because in that denomination, God does not judge you for your actions. How can you really seriously tell me that there is true justice in this system if you're not judging people for the actions that they do?
You can't say murder is wrong or slavery is wrong, because it would be just your opinion.
I mean, can you say slavery is wrong? Because God seems to be perfectly fine with slavery in both the New and the Old Testament. In fact, God prescribes exactly how you can get slaves. He tells you to go to the countries surrounding you and attain your slaves. So I don't think that you have a good position to say that slavery is wrong. I mean, you might say slavery is wrong now because of some apologetic that you could pull out of your butt for, why God thinks it's wrong. There are certainly arguments for that, but I think that they're all pretty poor arguments, considering that God directly commands the Israelites to take slaves and is perfectly fine with Israelites having slaves. And I mean chattel slaves, not like indentured servants or anything like that, any kind of word games you want to pull. Talking property, chattel slaves, the kind of slaves where you don't get set free after 6 years. You are a slave forever and are passed on as inheritable property. God's perfectly fine with that. So when apologists like this guy right here tells me that God don't like slavery none, I don't know what in the fuck they're talking about, because God obviously has no problem with slavery, didn't see a problem with it then, and my bet is that he doesn't see a problem with it now. well. It's just that apologists have determined that it's bad because they were forced to determine that it was bad when, at least here in America, when we abolished slavery, because everybody was like, yeah, we don't like slavery no more. Well, for the most part. I mean, there were a lot of people that were still like, well, if we gotta free the slaves to win this Civil War, I guess that's what we gotta do. So, I mean, a lot of people were just sort of forced into the position of accepting it because they didn't like the Civil War. The Civil War will always be about the ability to own people as slaves, and you will not be able to convince me otherwise. My point in this entire rambling section here is that in the Bible, you cannot say slavery is bad. Using God's moral foundation, you cannot say slavery is bad. Everything that he says that the Bible or God thinks is bad, God really hasn't thought as being bad. As long as it's God's opinion that you should do it, then it's not bad to them. I have a different view, and I hope that you do too.
So here's what you get if you unpack all of these things that I just said. You get a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent creator, sustainable, moral, just, and loving. And all these things are attributes of God, and we haven't even opened the Bible yet.
Aha! I knew it! I knew I've heard this somewhere before.
We have an immaterial, timeless, spaceless, extremely powerful, extremely intelligent, sustaining creator who has purpose, who's absolutely morally perfect and personal. This is the God of biblical Christianity identified without reference to the Bible. We haven't even opened the Bible yet, and we have a being that looks like the God of the Bible.
Ah, yes, Frank Turek. That's who he listened to. He saw a Frank Turek video, wrote down a few notes, and then boom, here he is telling us what Frank Turek said. If I wanted to listen to Frank Turek, I would just listen to Frank Turek. I think this guy needs to try to formulate his own ideas. Because if you're just going to regurgitate what Frank Turek is telling us, I'm just going to go and listen to Frank Turek. Because I don't need to hear his bad ideas coming out of anybody else's mouth other than Frank Turek. And no, Frank sets up that entire situation to perfectly describe what he thinks the God of the Bible is described as, right? He sets all of that up to describe his God. Like I said at the very beginning of this video, if you are going to only ask a question that leads to only one answer, and that answer is your answer, that is not an honest investigation of any question. And just like here, what evidence do we have for God? If you're going to set this up as a begging the question thing that only ever leads to your particular version of God, that's not an honest investigation into the matter whatsoever. What Frank does is he ignores all counter evidence and builds up a case that describes what he thinks is God, and then asks at the end, well, who does that sound like? Sounds like God to me. Praise God, holy Jesus, I come to Jesus.
So those are just a few things that you could say to someone when they ask, what was even the first question? Oh, so those are just some things you could say when people ask of evidence that is outside of the Bible.
Oh God, this particular thing. I mean, I don't even get to the, well, who created God kind of deal, because this is like a response to a very particular apologist assertion. And that would be the assertion that everything that exists within like this universe or in reality begins to exist has a creator. Simply the way they get around that is just by moving the goalpost and saying that arbitrarily, by the way, that God didn't need to be created, and so therefore he doesn't need a creator, which is a very unfulfilling answer in my opinion, because all you're doing is just speculating and arbitrarily saying that God has this attribute. There's no real reason to think that he does have this attribute, so it amounts to an ad hoc speculation about God. So I don't know. This entire part right here just doesn't make a lot of sense to me, just because of that point.
And then they would say something along the lines of, well, who created God? And then you say, well, I don't think you quite understand the concept of God, because God is not affected by time, space, or matter.
Well, yeah, but you set all of that up so that your God escapes that. That's what I'm saying. It's arbitrary, being that God is timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. Like, what? God was not immaterial in the Old Testament. God definitely wasn't timeless in the Old Testament. Spaceless? I don't even know what in the fuck that means. If he's not immaterial, then he's not spaceless. This entire thing is perfectly crafted to describe what Frank Turek thinks is God, and then at the end ask the question about, hey, this description that I gave about God sounds like God, doesn't it? Anyway, I'm done with this guy's video. I can't take anymore. We've gone through enough, I think. But anyways, all in all, for this video, it was just a really bad regurgitation of what Frank Turek is saying on his whole spiel about how God exists. This guy goes through each and every one of Frank Turek's proofs, even uses one of Frank's catch lines at the end of, hey, we just described God and we haven't even opened the Bible yet. Obviously, he watched Frank Turek, but it's painfully obvious because of the really bad arguments that are listed here. None of them prove God. None of them will ever convince an atheist that God does exist, or at least it shouldn't convince anybody that God exists, except for people that already believe in that version of God. Thank you, heathens, for watching me today. I really appreciate you guys watching and sharing the videos and stuff. If you will, please go down below and let me know what you think about this guy's evidence. Do you think that he's not quoting Frank Turek, or that he didn't watch Frank Turek? Do you think that he watched somebody else? Let me know down below in the comments. And hey, while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like these kinds of videos. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.